happy to be joined by George Salamis. Many of you know George. And we're also going to be joined by Henry Lazenby. Many of you know Henry. Henry is a reporter for the Northern Miner and mining.com. We brought him over from Mining Journal. He's an international journalist with over 10 years of experience, heading up a North American focused resource news desk for different multinational media houses. Back in his native South Africa, where I believe he joins us from today, he was an award-winning community journalist before the B2B media market exposed him to mining. He came to Toronto, that became a permanent residence. Well, Canada anyway, not Toronto. He's out in Vancouver now. He makes frequent visits to mining and exploration sites, participating in industry conferences, and he specializes in covering North American and international mineral explorations. And he's just the person to sit down with George Salamis. So welcome, Henry. Do I have that right? Are you in South Africa right now?
Hi, Anthony. Yes, I'm joining you from Pretoria tonight. I hope the power stays on.
Well, I certainly hope so as well. I tell you, the wonders of the modern world. And George, of course, President and CEO of Integra Resources. Welcome, George. Where are you joining us from today?
Anthony, from joining you from my basement with a coat on because the furnace broke down this morning, so I'm freezing. But I'm very happy to be here.
Wow, George, you're a trooper. We'll try to get a good conversation going, and that'll hopefully warm you up a little bit. Get the engines running. George, are you? Is the flooding in BC been a problem? Is it related to the heater going down?
It's not. No, this is a separate problem. It's lack of maintenance on my part, unfortunately, Anthony. So this is of my own doing. Nothing to do with
the perils of being a busy executive, George. Sometimes those really practical details get left behind. Well, listen, thanks for joining us. I'll turn it over to the two of you and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, excellent. Thank you, Anthony. I look forward to this chat. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, George Salamis, the President and CEO of Integra Resources. George brings over 30 years of experience in the mining and resource exploration industry to the table. He has been involved in over $2 billion of mergers and acquisition transactions, either through asset sales or his involvement with junior mining companies. George most recently acted as executive chairman of Integra Gold Corp, which was sold to Eldorado Gold for 590 million Canadian dollars. George co-led the efforts behind the 2016 Integra Gold Rush Challenge and the 2017 #Disrupt Mining initiatives that encourage innovation and technology disruption in the mining industry. George is a sought-after speaker on mining innovation. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in geology from the University of Montreal's École Polytechnique. George has discovered, financed, built, managed, or sold more than 5 major mineral deposits around the world. He began his career working for 2 major mining companies, Placer Dome and Cameco Corp, over a 12-year period before transitioning into mineral exploration and junior mining in 2001. George is currently also a director of Contact Gold Corp and Nucor Gold Limited. Welcome, George. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Henry, thanks, and great to see you again. Thanks for having me today, by the way. This is quite an esteemed panel. I don't know what I'm doing here personally, but it's a pleasure to be here.
You're an authority on innovation. That's why you're here.
Okay, well, I'll do my best.
With that, let's jump into it. So Integra Resources has been building exploration and development momentum at its Coeur d'Alembert and earlier stage Florida Mountain projects, both in Idaho, USA. Let's start this session by asking you to give us an update on key successes and milestones the team has achieved at both projects through the year to date.
Yeah, so I mean, in a very short 4-year period, we've done a lot on the project, and thanks to this great team and great management group that I work with and a phenomenal board, we've achieved a lot. So kind of top of the list, really, Henry, Florida Mountain High Grade, for example, over the last couple of years, we've released what is now a list of over 100 high-grade gold and silver intercepts, largely outside of the Florida Mountain resource base. So, we're seeing, a lot of growth potential there. We put out some news, for example, a couple of weeks ago in this area of Sullivan Gulch, where we announced these really thick zones of gold and silver mineralization, several football fields of thickness is really in an area that really hasn't been included into a current mine plan and will be included into future mine plans, we feel, in future studies. We very recently put out this milestone ESG report for the project, for the company, which we're really proud of. There was a lot of great work that went into that. And then last but not least, we've got a pending PFS study, which is going to show, we believe, a much larger, much more economically robust project than we demonstrated in the PEA 2 years ago, which was already a great starting point. That PEA was great. We think we're going to demonstrate an even better project this time around.
Mm. All right, so let's pick up with the pre-feasibility and progress at Delamar. In keeping with our thematic for today, which really centers about innovation and how to make money cool, how is Integra applying innovative new approaches to extract increased efficiencies at reduced cost, all to improve the sustainability of the future operation?
Yeah, Henry, innovation has always been a core value of the Integra, let's call it, group of companies, Integra 1.0, Integra 2.0. It's one of our three main core values. It's something that we demand from the team. Specifically, we always have in both companies. And so of late, recently we pitched a few ideas to our engineers and the team that's chaperoning the study with respect to some more sustainable alternatives from a development and operation perspective. And when we pitched these, in the beginning, they looked at us like we were nuts. Literally, they thought we were crazy in suggesting these things. However, through the course of time, when we went through more study of these alternatives, the engineers and our consultants saw that there was tremendous merit to looking at these. Not only did they reduce our carbon footprint substantially, but they also increased our margins and substantially as well. So they were absolutely blown away by some of these alternatives. And just to give you a couple of examples of two of them that you'll see in the upcoming study, one of them is the introduction of the Railveyor system, which is a really cool system. It's something that I saw years ago in operation at an Agnico Eagle operation in northern Quebec. It's basically an electric light rail system that's used to haul ore from one place to another. It's used in a couple of mining operations around the world. It's really cheap to operate. And in our case, it's actually going to generate power. We're going to be taking, I can't call it ore yet, according to the rules and regs, but I can call it mineralization. We'll be taking gold and silver mineralization from one place at a higher altitude down to the mill site at a lower altitude, and thereby generating power. So that reduces our demand for power from the Idaho grid. It reduces noise, it reduces dust. Obviously, we'll need far fewer trucks as a result of this system, and therefore, the water consumption will be mitigated through the use of this. But most importantly, it really reduces our dependency on diesel, and we all know the impact of that on things like carbon footprints, for example. I mean, the second thing that we looked at, and you'll see implemented in the upcoming study, is the implementation of solar power. This is going to be a significant component of this mining operation. Just how much will be determined in the years to come, but you will see a component of it in the upcoming PFS. And it comes at a pretty interesting time because there's a discussion happening in Idaho, in the state of Idaho, to the extent that they want to reduce their power demands. They want to make their power grid more green. And how are they going to do that? So we're hitting Idaho at the right time with this idea, because Delamar will be a large power consumer at the end of the day. This is a really creative solution that's going to ultimately be a win-win for everybody, for ourselves, in terms of being able to sustain ourselves partially through solar power that we generate on site, but for generations to come around the mine site, because once this mine is shut down, this power will continue to be generated and fed back into the grid. So, it's a win-win situation for everybody. And then kind of last but not least, we've got a bunch of initiatives on the go in terms of partnerships, pretty important ones, pretty interesting ones. We have one with Trout Unlimited, which is a well-known sort of environmentally focused NGO, and we're partnering with them, looking at rehabilitating trout habitats in the area that have been disturbed by mining activities that go back to the late 1800s. And then our partnership with this great group called Warm Springs, which is, it's fantastic to work with this group. They're based in Boise, and they're kind of like this shadow consulting group, which sits on the sidelines of our main consulting group. And every time there's an initiative to implement development or operations strategy into the PFS, they will jump in where they see an opportunity and say, have you thought about this? Railveyor, for example, it can generate power. It can reduce your power demand and your carbon footprint at the same time. And thereby we're not doing things in a traditional way, but we're doing things in a more sustainable way. And Warm Springs is leading the charge on that. They're a really cool group to work with.
Yeah. So as you've alluded to, mining has been a key component of the Idaho economy for more than a century. So while work is progressing on finalizing the PFS at DeLamar, what else is happening in terms of exploration at both properties? Where is the mineral upside for the company?
That's one thing that we've done consistently, we feel, over the past 4 years. I guess the question is, where isn't the upside on the project? When we acquired these projects from Kinross 4 years ago, we largely, the assumptions that we made and everybody else made were, there were a bunch of disparate, gold and silver deposits with no real link to each other. Well, we've done a really phenomenal job led by our exploration team in really unifying these deposits into a really large area. It's 100 square kilometers. It's big. It's a district. And on that basis, we've proven potential in a myriad of areas. We've been able to show potential profitability from bulk tonnage open pit mining, which we'll demonstrate in the upcoming PFS, obviously. There's the high grade component, which I alluded to earlier at Florida Mountain. If you start to think about what the operation world at DeLamar will look like when you start to maybe displace some low grade feed from the open pits with high grade potentially from an underground source at Florida Mountain, that does tremendous things to the project economics in the future. Pretty interesting stuff. Sullivan Gulch, again, I mentioned, football fields of thicknesses of gold and silver mineralization, some of which hasn't been included into a resource model or a mine plan yet, which is a nut we think we're going to be cracking here in the next year. And then there's all those other sort of what I would call sort of more mid-stage projects, Blue Gulch, Rich Gulch, with these huge IP anomalies, War Eagle, Black Sheep, etc. So many targets in this environment. It's a great problem to have in our case.
Certainly. So on the permitting side, where does DeLamar stand at the moment, and what does the road ahead look like? And perhaps in the same breath, can I ask you, what does the Idaho regulatory environment look like in support of mining?
So obviously we have a PFS study to deliver, and then next year is going to be about delivering the plan of operations. And that's the first major step in permitting. And so that plan of operations is essentially the definition of the box, the area that we plan to do our mining activity, where we plan to put in infrastructure, heap leach pads, mills, tailings dams, etc. And so a lot of study goes into that. A lot of the material, in fact, that we're putting into this PFS study will feed into that. But that's kind of next year's task. And then there's what's called a completeness review, which is a kind of a back and forth process with both the state and the Bureau of Land Management, where their questions are asked. Can you do this differently? Give us more information on this aspect, etc. Because this is an area which is really well known. It was in production up until the year 2000 under the Kinross banner. A lot is known. It was in operation fairly recently. So both the BLM and the Idaho permitting authorities view this area as previously disturbed and recently disturbed. And so therefore we feel that our iterations of permitting, while rigorous, will be fairly straightforward because a lot is known already. And then from there we go to the EIS process and then a record of decision. And that's essentially a sort of a 3-year time frame starting now, essentially, is kind of what we're looking at going forward.
And just comment on the regulatory environment. Is it supportive of mine development at the moment?
It is, certainly. In the context of Idaho, we're working with a really, how should I say, supportive government body that's pro-mining, definitely. I mean, there's a long legacy and a long history of mining, successful mining in the state of Idaho. So, our dealings with them have been great. We've started actually the process of consultation with the Bureau of Land Management. In fact, we started that a year ago, probably about a year earlier than any company of our size would be dealing with, simply because so much is known about the project already. And so far the Bureau of BLM have been great to deal with. Again, it's a process where you have to satisfy both the state and the federal authorities at the same time. And so far, so good. It's a fairly prescriptive process. We know what we need to do. There's little sort of room to deviate from that prescriptive plan, and it should be fairly straightforward for us.
Okay, that sounds encouraging. So as a junior, Integra is one of the few in its peer group to have recently released an ESG report. Please walk us through some of the key points in the report, and why do so few of your peers appear to publish such reports?
Well, so first off, the notion of sustainability and ESG as a whole is something that we all have to do, not just the major mining companies, the junior mining companies, the junior developers, which is our kind of space. We have to pay attention to this. I mean, there've been a lot of sins in the past that our generations have paid for. We have to stop that nonsense. We have to start really paying a lot of more attention to the tenets of good ESG practices. And so this report that we put out recently is a 60-page report, very exhaustive. A lot of work went into it. A lot of Excel tables, for example, that were tacked onto it, which you can go onto our website and see. Those tables are basically holding us accountable to ESG measures with various metrics which we'll measure over time. You don't see this in the junior mining space, and they're fairly exhaustive, but it's really something that holds us accountable to improving our ESG standard on the project. For us, getting the entire team involved in this was really important. Certainly on the ground in Idaho, particularly important because Idahoans' livelihoods are largely tied to the land. In Idaho, people live off the land down there in various means, and so ESG is critically important to them, and we take it seriously. A bunch of other initiatives that were in that ESG report, for example, our work or affiliation to the hashtag Mining Feeds BC effort. We raised $100,000 for rural food banks in British Columbia. We did something similar at the ground level in Idaho during the pandemic, during the crazy days, or early days of the pandemic. Other things that were in that report, for example, 0 reportable spills over the past year, 0 recordable health and safety incidents. Again, this becomes a benchmark for us to try to maintain as we go forward. And also, for the first time ever, reporting our scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions. And again, this is a baseline for us. We report where we're at in terms of those levels, scope 1 and scope 2, and we try to better ourselves going forward, not make them worse. And so, a first for us. Not many juniors do this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, perhaps as a follow-on to that question, how can ESG serve as a catalyst for deal making?
Yeah, so ESG is kind of working its way into all aspects of business, not just good practices on the ground, but in deal making, in setting the tone for project development. For example, Cormark Securities came out with this great report, which provided a bit of an overview of then and now in terms of drivers of project economics, for example. So, if you looked at what the old trifecta of perfection was for a company, it was really, economies of scale, maximize production levels, high IRR, grade and tonnage was king, and period. That's all you really had to do. Now the new trifecta is really how low a carbon footprint can you achieve on site? Really, really important from a development and operation point of view. The strategic importance of what you're producing. And in our case, silver is a big component of what we will be producing. Silver is a big component of the greening of economies around the world. So that's an important factor in the grand scheme. So, you know, there's much more scrutiny in terms of project development, build, construct, you know, plans, and as they relate to ESG initiatives, lots more scrutiny. You know, the low-hanging fruit, for example, of projects, you know, around the world, but specifically in Idaho, you know, there's an attention reverting back to tier 1 jurisdictions, and projects that might have been marginal in the past, which we're now returning to at different metal prices, looking at reopening. So what are the incentives to develop those, and how do they fit within, you know, proper ESG practice? That's pretty important in the end of the day. I guess, you know, another thing on that angle is, you know, how does ESG fit into investment? This is something that we're thinking about a lot these days. How do we broaden the audience of potential investors and accommodate ESG at the same time? It's, you know, these are all really interesting points for us as a company right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, while sticking with ESG, how has the advent of these relatively new investment filters impacted the junior exploration sector's access to capital? Is it helping juniors or hindering them?
Well, so to take a step back from that question, I think the time will come, if it's not here, it's pretty soon, where we'll start to see a scarcity of capital to develop projects owned by companies that don't have a strong ESG focus, right? That, you know, the barriers to finance the development plans will start to become great, especially for those companies without a strong ESG sort of set of tenets and principles to live by. That said, you know, companies of our size, we're not seeing that yet, because I believe we don't fit the mold yet of the big ESG rating houses that are out there, for example, that provide those scorecards for how companies perform on an ESG basis. I think there'll be a time, and I think that time is very soon, where you'll start to see ESG rating services for companies of even our size. And that means we have to set ourselves up for that event when it comes, because with that also comes the investment dollars that we require to develop our projects. And so we have to start preparing for that. Once that comes, it'll be a game changer. I mean, for example, I mean, if you look at, I'm trying to recall, there was, over the course of the last year, there were some statistics that came out that showed, I think by memory, about $50 billion of sustainable development capital has entered sort of the realm of investment from a ETF perspective. And that was just I think in the last year. The year before that, it was half that. And the year before that, it was 1/10 that. So there's a growing trend of money that wants to come in to invest in projects needs to be put into responsibly developed projects. And so we have to set ourselves up for that. I don't think anybody's going to have a choice on that end at the end of the day, but we don't look at it as a burden. We look at that as an opportunity. We have the time to set this up properly. It's something that is really meaningful to us and to our children and to the community surrounding our mining operations. So it's kind of a win-win, no-brainer for us. It's a natural path to head down.
Oh, I think Henry's frozen there, George. That might be the South African part coming in. George, we have one already from the audience here.
Sure.
What is the action that you referred to reducing truck haulage and diesel consumption?
Yeah, so the main one is that Railware system. It's a pretty neat system. You can go online and see some examples of where it's used, but it's essentially it's an electric rail car system, and that eliminates the use of trucks for haulage of ore principally, but it can be used for haulage of waste material as well. And in our case, because we're going from a higher altitude in one place, Florida Mountain specifically, to a lower altitude at Florida Mountain, on the way down the hill, we're actually generating electricity. We're not using it. We're actually generating electricity and putting it back into the grid, which is really, really interesting. And as I mentioned earlier, it has a number of knock-on benefits. It creates less dust, less need for water, but more specifically, fewer trucks. that reduces our carbon footprint substantially. That's the big one for us, for sure, in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of this project. And obviously the use of solar power as well. It's kind of a first. You don't see a lot of juniors implementing that style of power alternative into future development and production scenarios. We're doing it just because it makes sense.
Excellent. Well, it speaks to that the innovative mindset that you bring to the table and what you're doing there, George, for sure. And I love that thinking about ESG and bringing that down to the level, not just for the big producers, but anticipating that next wave and seeing that as an opportunity. I think that's critical thinking for all of our industry. George, I'd like to turn it a little bit over to the markets where we're sit. I led off today talking a little bit about how, by most metrics, it looks like a historic opportunity to be investing in gold and silver. In terms of, we know what the criticism was 5 years ago, maybe typified by John Paulson's comments about gold and precious metal companies not being great stewards of capital, not having that return on equity. Now, a lot of the metrics that we're seeing coming out of the precious metal states, companies, looks incredibly strong, lots of free cash flow, lots of profitability, maintaining costs, not going crazy with M&As. The big deals seem to be zero premiums. You've been in this industry for a while. Is this a historic opportunity? What's your read on what's going on right now, and why no love from the markets in general for the precious metal space?
I mean, Anthony, just to answer your last question first, why no love? Simply put, I mean, there have been other sectors of investment angles that have generated some spectacular returns. The COVID rebound stocks, for example, have been tremendous hits. So, where are you going to put your money into something that has potential for, a 10x in the short term, or something that might sort of tread water until commodities prices take off? Well, I know where I put my money, and that's simply put, that's what's happened. Yeah. That market, I believe, has been tapped out, the sort of the COVID rebound stocks, if you will. I think we're, due to forces that have come upon us as a planet in the last, year or two, the narrative of inflation and even hyperinflation has really started to creep in. Thank God that, we've gone from having, bodies like the Fed and the central banks around the world, talking about inflation as being transitory. It's nothing that we really need to worry about, to, oh, no, it's not transitory, it's here to stay. So that's furthering the narrative with respect to gold. Gold, as we know, has been a traditional safe haven in times of inflation and certainly hyperinflation. So the setup for gold is really good going forward. From an M&A perspective, to your point, there's been a lot of fiscal discipline in and amongst the traditional sort of mid-tier major gold producers, tightening their belts, making great margins, developing their war chests, but they haven't been doing much about reserve and resource replacement themselves. So, I've seen a few of these cycles before, and typically what needs to happen for M&A to kick off is you need these buyers, these traditional buyers, to start feeling better about themselves in terms of their own valuations. Once they feel better about themselves, their shareholders feel better about owning them, they start to gain a license to go out and buy things. And I think we're starting to see that, the first signs of that now. Certainly there've been a couple of significant transactions announced in the last, say, 6 or 8 weeks. I think it's kind of just the start here, Anthony.
Okay, so you see that accelerating into 2022. Do you think, what would be the major theme that you'll be looking at that you think will drive precious metals market for 2022?
Yeah, the major theme, precious metal markets for gold specifically, it's safety, it's hedge against inflation. For silver, it's going to be greening economy demand of silver, which is a big component of green economies around the world. Those two are going to be significant drivers for sure.
Awesome. Listen, George, really appreciate you taking the time. Really nice to be able to catch up with you. Hopefully Henry's okay. We'll check in on him, make sure that he's all right in South Africa. But despite the broken furnace, showing up with the jacket and dedicating your time and your insights to our platform, much appreciated, George. Continued success.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Bye now.